And welcome to this first World Citizen Society panel, where we will be looking at the impact of climate change and more specifically, how we can take action and what does effective action look like. We have a fantastic selection of guests joining us for this discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce them all. Firstly, we have Smriti Mishra, who is the head of artificial intelligence at Earthbank, a financial technology organization. We also have the entrepreneur, Jack Sim, joining us all the way from Singapore. He founded the World Toilet Organization, an organization that focuses on global sanitation. We also have Esam Dow joining us. He's the co-founder of Humanity Crew, an organization that specializes in refugee mental health. And finally, from Kenya, we have Elizabeth Watuti, who is a youth environmental activist and set up the Green Generation Initiative, which is focused on green projects in the local area. Also, we have two student guests joining us. We have Jessie and Gray and Claire Pay, who will be posing some questions to the speakers and perhaps challenging them on certain issues. And finally, my name is Willem. I'm a student at the University of Bristol, and I will be moderating today's discussion. So let's get started. I think a lot of the time as young people, as a student, we often hear, the future's in your hands. You've got to tackle these huge environmental problems, these huge world issues. And I think probably Claire, Jessin, and everyone can attest that that's quite a daunting prospect. So I'd like to start off by finding out, why is it important that people get engaged? What's your opinion on young people engagement? Is it a necessary component of climate action, or is it actually less important than we might originally think? Jack, I'd like to start off with you.
So I think that when I was young, we were very poor in Singapore in the 1960s, and we were very frugal. And when people are very frugal, they don't have enough money to buy things to throw away. And Alvin Toffler in 1973 explained that in the future, we will throw away our bags, our pens, everything that we own, even our watches, which we cannot believe that we will throw away our watches because it's very expensive. And then it says that we will not just throw away things, we will also throw away our relationship. We will have divorce. We will live in a transient society. And we didn't believe it in 1973 when we read the book. And eventually everything is true. So now we have to think, do we actually get better or we got worse? And one of the solutions I think we need to do is to be frugal. The COP26, the politicians, when they go to meet, I can guarantee you nothing will happen because nothing happened for the last 27 years they have been discussing. And nothing will happen because if every year they discuss and nothing happen, I think it is time to believe that the politician will not solve it. So what can we do? We should do two things. The first thing is live a simple life and do not buy things. Don't buy stuff. That's all. If you don't buy, you got nothing to throw away. And therefore, you will save the environment because you only eat a little bit that you need and you don't overeat. So you never become fat. Your cupboard will never become full. And you will have a lot of extra time to mix with your friends. So do not go on this consumption growth economic model that is driving us crazy. So that's one. And if you can't do that, then you must also accept the alternative that if we continue what we are doing, 50% of human population will have to die. And the other 50% will survive because now the global warming will not be so bad because only 50% of the people are alive. And then that will be sustainable. So just imagine that now we have 7 people on this panel and half or maybe 4 of us will die, right? And then there's just 3 of us left. And then everything will be all right. So if you don't solve, nature will solve it for us. So they will solve it by disease, by flooding, by disaster, even by our internal war. And then everything will be solved. So don't worry. As long as 50% of us die, everything will be solved. But the other
Okay,
solution is...
sorry, Jack. Thank you for that. I just want to let somebody else have a go.
Thank you.
Well, that's quite a pessimistic view of what people can do and how people can engage with the environment. Elizabeth, do you share the same view as Jack?
I somehow tend to be of a slightly different perspective in terms of, and especially why is it that young people are getting involved in conservation. And I think looking at some of the reports that we are seeing right now, for example, the latest IPCC report, and without even going further, I'd like to reference my own city, my own country, Nairobi, where we just recently got a scientific report that says that the city might be uninhabitable in the next 50 years. And who is going to live in that city, or who is supposed to live in that city in the next 50 years? It's going to be the young people, the children of today, who will have to live longer with the consequences of the world's inaction today, or live longer with the consequences of any wrong action that the world decides to take today. So I think, in my point of view, it is just an opportunity for us to really be selfless at the same time and recognize that whatever is happening in the world today, in any case, our actions should be mindful of how we leave this planet for the next generations. And if anything, it is the young people right now who are trying to make most of the changes that we talk about every day. I live in a country where there are so many youth groups and women groups coming together trying to solve complex issues like climate change. They don't really understand much about it, but they are mobilizing, organizing, and trying to do much more on the ground in restoration, trying to educate their communities, trying to see how they can make sure that the impacts of climate change are not so much impactful to them. But at the end of the day, these people are the ones on the front line of these challenges, but the ones still working on the solutions. But what is it that the people that are in bigger positions of power, who have got a huge capacity and so much resources and so much power to just do too much more than what these people are doing, what is it that they are doing? And I think that is where young people come in to lobby, and not just lobby, but to really push for the leaders, the bigger decision makers, to do much more for the environment. I am an activist, yes. I take part in, protests, and take part in every place that I get a chance to give my voice. But apart from that, I am also doing much more on the ground. The things we are talking about on the ground, I am doing that as well on nature restoration. But I want to see more. I want to see the same from my leaders, who have got more resources, who have got more power to do much more than I can do and many other young people can do out there. And I think that is why most of us are in this fight, because we want to live in a habitable world. We want to live in a planet that is livable, and we want to be assured of a safe future. And right now, with the trends in the world, we are not assured yet, because so much is happening in the world. We speak every day and say that we want, for example, we need governments to stop investing in fossil fuels. We say we need massive investments in nature regeneration, but we are not seeing much of this happening on a wider perspective, which can really move us closer to the real action we're talking about in terms of climate change. Yeah. So that exactly is my position as a young person in a place that is most affected by climate change.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Does anybody, this is for Smriti and SM, do you guys agree that our energy should be focused on lobbying governments, or in fact we can do stuff without them? We can step back, take our own initiatives without directing our energy at the government? Because I think for a lot of people that seems quite futile. If one of you wants to come in, Smriti.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that it has to be a combined effort. It can't be like any one person or organization fighting. If people at the community level, they are fighting, they need support of lawmaking organizations, governments, anyone who's like more in power, as Elizabeth very rightly mentioned. They have to come in and support, because when, for example, like we work a lot with people in Ghana and Mali with shea butter plantations. They get $40 a month. So if they want to like shift to a more sustainable way of farming, there are different methods of agriculture which are more which are better for climate change. So if they want to shift to that, it's expensive for them. So they need support, they need financial support, they need a lot more, they need some tools. So it has to be any sort of, like, they have chiefs there. So whoever is in like a higher position, they have to be involved. Another thing that I wanted to add to the question is, even on a more personal level, I think it's very important for youth to be involved because they are so much more adaptable as compared to anyone from like an older generation. And when it comes to climate change, changing lifestyle is extremely important. So, like, I used to eat meat, but I don't anymore. And so, like, there are some small things like that, which is probably a little more difficult for someone from an older generation to change as compared to us.
Essam, I saw you wanted to come in.
Definitely, I think, I'm a child psychiatrist, so first they are the future. The children are the future. Who are the ones that we're going to vote? They are the one who are going to be politicians, policymakers, activists. Actually, the future that we are afraid of, that we are affecting the future so badly with how we behave, is actually going to affect these young people, because this is their future. The older one, will probably see 10, 20 years and nothing going to happen in this 20 years. But in 50 years, something like this, in 60 years, the change will be so dramatically. So it's actually, they are the one who are really going to be affected with, because of what we are, how our life is. And also they are the one who are going to change everything. And I totally agree with this with Samarita, about now the percentage of the young people who are vegan, for example, is higher than the older people. So these children or young people now, they will be parents, and most probably, maybe 50% of your children will be vegan. So if you want to do any kind of a change for a long term, it should be starts from the children. The adults, in psychology and psychiatry, we say that the adults are like, it's a big tree. You can't really shape it anymore. You can't, make it go to the right, to the left. But as with the bonsai, with the children, you can really design them, as Mr. Miyagi did with the trees. And so, and definitely, if you want to invest in something, it's in the children. The problem is, the impact is a long term. And now with all these social medias and lifestyle, we are so want things that right now, I want to change to be now. And if you invest in children, you don't see any kind of a change or any impact now. And that's why people don't really want to invest in this. So, but if you want for a long term, it's totally on the children.
Yeah. And I suppose the question then that arises from that is, how do we get young people involved? How do we engage them? Because I think a lot of people might feel jaded or worn out by talk of climate change, natural disasters, pollution, flooding, whatever it may be. So do we need to take a different approach? For example, Essam, could we talk about refugees and how climate change is going to impact them? Tell human stories. Is that something, sort of a different alternative way to get people engaged? Is that something that's necessary?
First, I think the link between refugees and displaced population and the climate change is not only like how climate change is going to affect the refugees. It's actually only in the last 2 years, there was 2 million people who were forcibly displaced due to climate change. Climate change in a few years will be one of the most, it will be one of the major reasons why people are forcibly displaced. So this is one of the issues. So people need to be involved in this situation, and young people, because they should know this is one of the things, like there is war, persecution, and other things, and especially in countries like in Europe, in Northern Europe, and in countries where that the climate is already on the edge, they will be living in areas that are not compatible with life very soon. So this is one thing. But I totally agree with you that if we want to get young people involved in any initiative, or in general, we need to humanize it. We need to tell stories. This is something that I do it, all my talks, and even if I go for a professional conference or something, I usually tell stories first, because I feel it's a duty that people listen to the stories of the people. They don't have a voice, but again, it just make the people feel, oh, okay, this kid is like my kid. This person, oh, I can be, he's telling my story. They have the same thing, so it's give it this kind of humanization for the cause.
Thanks, Essa. I was wondering, Jessin or Claire, do you have any questions that relate to what's been brought up for our speakers?
Yeah, so this has already been such an interesting conversation, and you can really see where everyone's backgrounds are coming into this. But I think one thing that we really see coming through is this idea of like future-oriented thinking, like, oh, if we make our changes in our lives now, maybe we can drive the market and drive companies and governments to see that this is what's important to us. And maybe if we think about the people who will be displaced in the future, then we can influence people to take action. But I think this long-term thinking, it's like Jack said, like 20 years too late, and especially with the new IPCC report, I think it's even more clear that action isn't, like, obviously it needs to be long-term, but also things need to be happening right now, and big things. And I think one of the things that people struggle a lot with in environmental activism is where we feel like small people fighting a giant, which is the government, which is corporations who really just oftentimes do not care about these issues. And it's easy to feel like we're powerless, or like Jackson said, it's been 20 years and it seems like they haven't done anything. So my question is, how can we as individual citizens and as students and as activists not feel discouraged by the lack of action from governments? And how do we continue to stay optimistic? Do we need a new form of activism, or are we on the right path at all?
Jack, do you want to comment on that?
Honestly, it's not going to happen. I'm so sorry. We're all going to die. You have to accept that. Just don't pretend. We have to stop pretending that, I'm planting 1 million trees. It's nothing. Because will the automobile industry stop producing cars? Will the airline stop flying? Will the air conditioning and the heating industry stop? Will the fast food grow or stop? Will the shopping continue? And the answer is, people have two mouths. They say the moral thing, they say the correct thing, and they don't do it, right? Will you switch off the lights whenever you leave the room? Will you do all these things? The answer is no, for sure no. And then the politician, when they sit together, they will say, America will say China pollutes the most. China will say, you polluted per capita a lot. And then India will say, don't talk to me, I'm just a developing country. And then you guys chop down all your trees in Europe. Then you tell me that I'm wrong. And so everybody is talking a little partial. They are partialists, right? So what are they? Politically driven. Every election cycle is 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. And within the election cycle, the politician will have to survive or they get voted out. So how do you survive is to burn more oil, to deliver more material comfort. So I'm sorry, we have to die. And then when you die, then the population will shrink and then everything will be all right again. So that is one solution. The other solution is don't buy stuff. Don't spend money. Don't go out there and try to show off whatever new clothing. Just use what is already in your cupboard, and do that for 1 whole year, and then you realize that you can do it for 2 whole years, and then maybe you need food, but all the rest, your computer lasts very long, your cell phone every 2 years, no need to re-engage, you know, just use the same thing. And if we keep on staying frugal, you'll end up with a lot of saving. And I think that is the practical thing to do.
Does anyone want to respond to what Jack said?
Maybe if I can just, sorry,
Sure.
because I understand the perspective you're coming from, and it's a very kind of intuitively appealing perspective. But on the other hand, I'm a big fan of kind of the multiplicity of strategies, and I'm hesitant to say that the governments will never do anything. I mean, if you think back to maybe in the past, the Montreal Protocol was passed on the substances that depleted the ozone layer, and there were huge movements against pollution, kind of plastic pollution and so on. So I'm wondering maybe if anyone else has an alternative perspective on if there's any potential for more than just an individual focused strategy of I'm just going to consume less, especially maybe for people in less developed countries who don't have that much less to consume.
I would love to take, if possible. You know, I totally first agree with Jack. You know, I will tell you know, a very funny, sad anecdote from my work. You know, I work with kids in war zones, refugees. But on the other hand, I use you know, I have a phone, iPhone, Android, doesn't matter, and we all know that to produce this phone, there was kids at the age of 4 and 5 and 6 working in mines in Africa, digging for my phone. So really, like, even though I do all the right things and helping kids, like, if I just don't use the phone, it will be actually, you know, I will save more lives maybe than what I'm doing. So it's really complicated. I totally understand and agree with Jack that it needs to start with the self, you know, because if I, as a Psalm, I'm not really producing things and buying, you know, brands and showing up and stuff, things will be changed. At the end, it's education, and this is, I think, it's really important to educate our children. You know, for my baby first year, I told everyone, like, she had everything. Really, we buy everything. Please don't bring any gifts. There's a fund. If you put the money in this fund, I will double the money you put. And we succeed to raise something around $10,000, something like this, including from friends, and also to become like a movement. People start putting money, you know, and saying happy birthday to Alma and stuff. And then we took this money and we support a soccer team for children in one of the poorest neighborhoods here in the city. So, you know, it even though maybe Jack, you know, opinion is a little bit pessimistic, or it starts with the self, but I think it's the right approach. But on the other hand, I totally agree that there is other things we can do. You know, politician will not do anything. Politician needs the like on Facebook and on Instagram. They want things that now. They don't want to build a program that they will have the fruits in 20 years, but this is local programs. So they will do, as Jack said, something that is more material and fast, now and here and now. And usually no solutions comes like this. So that's why I think that I don't know if it's a non-profit organization, but the whole, you know, sector of humanitarian aid and non-profit organization need to change. I don't say that it need to take the responsibility, because if the system now will take the responsibility, they are worse than politicians. I think that the non-government organization, the humanitarian aid world is worse than politicians and governments, unfortunately. But there's a lot of optimism to change the system. So if we succeed actually to work on this field and to educate the young people and also the new entrepreneur and the activism to change this kind of activism to something more healthy, I think, yes, we can do a lot of change.
Sorry, SM. I just wanted to ask, what in particular about the humanitarian section are you more pessimistic about? Just briefly explain to people watching what you mean by that.
It's another arm of the politician. It's a money laundering arm of the politician. You send your army to attack Syria, then you send your security company and your companies to build Syria and protect Syria. Then you send your own NGOs to money launder your donation and tax refund, and tax deductible and 501c. All these terminology. You pay the big organization money, you take your tax refund, and then they will pay the humanitarian aid workers. The funny thing that I will just tell you a very sad statistics. 97% of the humanitarian work done in Syria are done by Syrian NGOs, but they received only 1% from all the humanitarian aid that comes to Syria. And the 3% that done by Western NGOs received 99% of all the humanitarian money and donations. The same person, not as the same person actually, the head of a Western NGO, a field coordinator inside Syria, that he's usually Syrian because they're afraid to enter Syria, will receive $300 maximum, a salary or less. And the Western field coordinator, who is staying in a safe area in Turkey next to Syria, will receive $20,000, I don't know, or 3 or 4, because he's in a war zone. No, he's not a war zone. He's protected in a very nice house next to Syria. So even there's a lot of discrimination and the white attitude and the West. And there is no collaboration. If you have a fund, you want to save it and you don't want to share it with anyone, and no collaboration. And at the end, it becomes your work. So I work in a field that when there was a situation become better for the people in the camp, the first people who were freaking out were the NGOs. Because what do we get? Because there's a lot of people, a lot of NGOs rely on this situation. This is their career and stuff. So we need to rethink about how the humanitarian aid model should work, and how we can make it more independent, not rely on donations, and also not a lot of politician and political NGOs inside this.
Thanks. Does anybody else want to come in on this sort of tension between individual consumption versus organizing and getting involved in activism?
Yeah, I want to also add something on the same and really insist on the fact that we shouldn't really separate the two issues around individual responsibility and system change. Because at the end of the day, this is about recognizing that this is everyone's responsibility. It's only that some have much more to do than others. There are those that we need to see much more, because as well, if you look at climate change and the aspect of emissions reductions as well, they are those who have contributed the most to this problem. And a good example with Africa is that Africa contributes less than 5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. But who stands to suffer the most from these impacts? It's the people in Africa. This is where we are having already so many deaths and so many livelihoods being affected and impacted every day by people who have least contributed to this problem. So I think the truth of the matter is that everyone definitely needs to do something. It doesn't mean that because Africa contributes the least, then Africa should not do anything. Africa also focuses on aspects on climate change adaptation and mitigation. And the same thing, I think, is supposed to happen for everyone else. And what we need to look at is the magnitude and the scale of what everyone needs to do right now. Because I'll give a good example with a ban of plastic bags in Kenya that happened in 2017 in August. So the bags are banned, single-use plastic. But you could tell before they were able to phase them out, people are still using the bags, but they're banned. So how do you expect people to also stop using these bags, and especially people that cannot be able to afford the new bags that came and were very expensive, and yet someone is still supplying the bags and smuggling the bags into the country? So I think it's a whole chain that needs to recognize that these two can never be separated. We cannot leave all the work to individuals, and we cannot say that it's all about system change and we all hold back our hands and do nothing. I think it's about everyone recognizing that we all have something that needs to be done right now. And at the end of the day, recognize that this is a storm that we are all in. It's like we are in the same storm, the climate crisis, but we are in different boats. And the fact that we are in different boats, there are people that have a wider capacity to adapt and more resources to adapt. And that is where solidarity comes in. I mean, we cannot just say that we are doomed. Yes.
I like to add. Yeah.
So Elizabeth, you cut off. I'll have to let Jack come in.
So imagine that there's no Black Friday shopping. Cancel it. Just ban it, right? And there's no Christmas shopping. Everybody says, don't buy me present on Christmas. I don't want any rubbish. Please stop. If you buy me present, I get angry with you. And then you see we can solve a lot of problem by ourselves, right? If we don't have the Chinese 11/11 Singles Day, which is the single day that a lot of online shopping happen, we say stop. We don't want to shop anymore. Problem go away very fast, you know. And so like Mitri say, you eat vegetarian, it's already 9 times less carbon dioxide than eating meat, right? So everything we can do, we don't have to say totally we don't eat meat, but maybe half the week we don't eat meat, you know. And then we don't say we don't travel, but we try to travel by train instead of driving cars. We try to travel by bus, and then everything will become lesser. And get your cupboard cleared up and just wear your favorite clothes, and all the ones you don't like give to somebody else, and then don't buy anymore, you know. So these are all habits we can do. But this whole moralizing of pretending to say I'm very agree on climate change and we must do this, do that, and politicians and then in the end we didn't do. I bet with my daughter that for 1 whole year I will not buy any more new clothing, and then we bet $100, and then I forgot and I bought a belt, so I lost $100. But I succeeded for everything except one belt, right? So we could play this, we gamify it, we bet with each other. For 1 year, I will not buy any clothing. And then they say, okay, if you do that, I'll give you $100. If you don't, then you pay me. So suddenly, everything changed. You know?
So I just let Elizabeth, she got cut off there, finish off the point she was making.
All right, thank you. Sorry I cut off, but I just wanted to finish by really mentioning that we can all agree that the effects of the climate crisis are definitely detectable right now. But what is going to happen is that they're going to get worse the longer we allow, temperatures to rise and just sit back and do nothing. But I think what we need to look at right now is how we can prevent some of the very worst effects of climate change. And this calls for us to start now and take rapid action, because if we don't, then more people are going to keep dying, and almost everyone right now will definitely experience a kind of life that we definitely do not want. And I think right now it's also looking about how we take action, what it is that we are doing right now. I would say most of the individual responsibility actions that you're mentioning, these are some of the things that I personally at some point choose to do. For example, I know there's still plastic bottles that are used, they sell water in plastic bottles, but I will not buy that. I will go with my own bottle everywhere and just refill my water, because I do not want to consume that. And I think that is one responsibility that I can do. The other thing, I definitely also focus a lot on nature restoration. I will grow trees everywhere. And, if I'm celebrating my birthday, my graduation, or anything, I will participate in growing the trees. But what I want to see is much more action from people. I want people to take this personally. And I think it's also about how we are treating nature. For me, one of the reasons why I got into this space in environmental conservation and climate activism was a personal issue. I personally began to grow trees at a very tender age, at the age of 7. But along the way, I also experienced psychological grief, getting into a hill, a forest that I loved the most as a child, a forest I would play with my fellow colleagues and children. And at some point, I went back there to check how the trees are doing. And all I found were logs and tree stumps. And it felt so personal. It became a personal fight to really protect and fight for nature. And this has always been the thought that everyone in the whole world could have that natural call to action. Because I felt angry at that point when I saw that. But that anger did not stop at the anger. It gave me a hunger to want to do something about these problems. So we cannot just say that the world is going to end and not do anything about these problems unless we are not disturbed, because when you get disturbed by a problem, you just develop that natural call to go and take action. And anybody right now who is at peace with everything that is happening around the world is clearly not disturbed by the challenges that are happening in the world, or they possibly feel that they might not maybe live in that world and hence no problem and no need to take to care anyway. So my hope is for people to have that natural call to action, to make it personal, because this is our planet. It's everyone's planet. Our children and children will live in this planet. So how do we want it to look like? Do our actions today impact and create that kind of world that we would like to see, or is it messing up the planet and leaving a messed up planet for the next generation? So I think that is why when I started, I mentioned about being selfless. And we are not fighting, and we are not in this fight because we own any of these nature places. Like, I will not fight for a forest because I own it. I don't. But it's because this is a heritage for the next generation. This is something that we all want. It's a planet that we all want to live in. And if we do not create it right now for the next generations, then we are just being selfish and not really being fair to the people that are going to live in this world in the coming years.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Do you think perhaps, this is for everyone, there's something missing from the conversation, and we talk about individual action or community action, but we're missing the element of technology and the role that technology is going to play in solving these crises that we see? If anyone wants to jump in on that.
I think Smitri wants to say something.
Yeah, no, I wanted to add on to the previous one. Yeah, we can.
No, quickly, you can quickly add on to the previous one, then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that in most cases, it's the people who are, like the ones who contribute the least to climate change are the ones who suffer the most. And in those cases, one of the most important things, or one of the most important ways how we can deal with such problems is through nature-based solutions, and using, like also using technology. And like, since I work in a fintech company, and we use artificial intelligence and technology to tackle those things. Another thing is measuring how much carbon we are emitting, like our carbon emissions, like carbon footprint as an individual and as an organization. There are several metrics and several key indicators to measure that. So once we have an idea of how much we are actually emitting to the society or to the environment, then it's like a little easier to actually offset it as well. So we can plant trees to compensate that. Definitely, it's not going to remove climate change, remove the problem of climate change. It's one of those things like there's bias in artificial intelligence, and it is always going to be there. But, like whatever we can do, our part as an organization, as an individual, as a community. So yeah, those things I think are really important. And as Elizabeth mentioned, the practices in Africa, they do so much, like so much sustainable farming. There's like a million things that they do. So it's really inspiring to see how communities are also participating. And could you please repeat your question?
Yes, no, I was going to touch upon how is technology sort of the missing element of this discussion. I just wanted to ask Jessie and Claire whether you feel that sort of using technology, but within our current system of governance, capitalism as we see it currently, whether that's going to be sufficient to solve our problems, or whether in fact we need to take a different tact, and the way society presents itself now is sufficient. I was wondering what your guys' thoughts are, and if you had any questions about that.
Yeah, so, sorry. I think I definitely don't believe that technology is we are able to innovate our way out of climate change, and we can sit back, do nothing, and let, energy technology, fintech and stuff solve our issues. That's definitely not it. But I definitely do think that technology is going to be such, or already is such a key part of helping vulnerable communities adapt. And for instance, adapt to different farming techniques and things like that, and also help us to predict better what's going to happen in the future and how we can tackle that now. And I actually work at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, and we work on exactly that, which is using data science and technology for sustainable development initiatives, specifically in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa. But I'm super interested to hear from Smriti about your work and your perspective from a fintech company, especially because finance and capitalism seems to be the biggest target of this.
Yeah, thank you. So it's right. Like I can give a real life example, sort of explaining what we exactly do and how it's contributing towards the problem of climate change. So if there's like a farmer or a small scale landholder, and they want to do sustainable farming, the problem was initially that they never got compensated for their work. So they used to get money one time for the plantation of trees, but never after for looking after the trees, watering them, etc. So the problem was that they used to go back and cut the same trees that they planted, and that wasn't never also accounted for, because people in the metrics it's there, but it's not actually there, so it's worse. So it's like a false positive case, which is the worst ever. So how technology can help here is, and if we want to go through a traditional way of accounting for the carbon, it's usually, like you fly in a team of experts, 25 experts from some country to some other country. That itself contributes towards climate change in a negative way. And then they go and with tapes, like physical measuring tape, they measure the trees and they count like 5% of the forest and then extrapolate the results. Now, here the problem used to be that there could be a forest fire going on in some other place, or some sort of like poaching of wood for timber, etc. So now, using technology, we can use satellite images, and we can at once monitor how the number of trees that's there. Also, the problem was with the physical method, it was super expensive and it used to take time. So it used to occur every 3 to 5 years once. And because of the cost, if the land was less than 1,200 acres, it wasn't possible to get your land verified for the amount of carbon sequestered. Now, using technology, we can do it every 6 months, and if tipped off, every 5 days. So it's super reliable, and because it's not actually going, flying in, etc., the cost is reduced a lot. So even like zero point 0.5 acres of land can be verified. So it's like an 18,000 fold increase in the verification land. So things like this, and they are getting paid. And because it's so like frugal, cost wise it's so less. They, like, whatever revenue we generate, we give 50% back to the community, so that they can like continue looking after the conservation part, etc. So that's how their finance also is taken care of, like through a digital bond, digital payment finance system.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
And I guess that's sort of illustrative of a broader point about technology, that costs are going to come down, and they will become sort of more universal, this sort of new technology. Jessian, do you have any questions about the idea of innovating our way out of the climate crisis, or are you more pessimistic about that attitude?
Well, I would agree with what Claire said in that, no one thing can get us out of the climate crisis. And certainly, in terms of what Jack was saying, for instance, innovation can't get us out of consumption. So if we're over-consuming, there's a limited amount that innovation can do to solve that problem. But I do think that it definitely has its uses, especially in terms of, for example, what Elizabeth was saying about how especially in places like Africa, it's really important to start thinking about mitigating the worst effects of climate change, and that's something that technology can help us do. maybe if someone else has something to say about focusing on limiting consumption versus mitigation versus what Smriti was saying about offsetting carbon even.
Jack, sorry,
I
Jack.
don't know if that's...
Yeah.
Sorry, you
So-
raised your hand.
COVID is the best climate change mitigator. You don't travel, and then suddenly the rivers become clean again. The tuna fish is coming back. So it's already told us frugality is the answer. Now, if you keep on promoting electric car, you will have a lot of batteries that are going to be rubbish. If you promote solar energy, you will have a lot of solar panel that's rubbish. But do you know that producing solar panel and producing the battery is also very toxic? And the amount of water that you have to wash for all this toxicity, people just tell you half of the story. In Singapore, if we were to generate electricity for solar for electric car, it will come from fossil fuel. And so what's the difference? You just transform one energy to another and then you say you are clean. It's not true. The world have narrative that lie to us, just like as some say, this whole NGO industry is just a false front for a military industry, a military industrial complex. So all the things we have to really see it for what it is. When I listen to Elizabeth and she's continuing repeating the same thing, next generation and all that, you know how I feel? I feel she moralized the problem. Well, I'm looking for real solution. And the real solution is things like if you stop Christmas shopping. That's the real solution. Otherwise we will moralize it to say we cannot do this for the next generation, and then you listen to Greta Thunberg say the same thing and the same thing and the same thing.
Yeah.
And we have to take action.
Yeah.
And the action is frugality.
Sorry, Jack, I just wanted to come in, but surely if we don't sort of in effect spread the word about frugality, it then also becomes this little minuscule action that has a tiny impact that you have criticized thus far. So how do we make it a widespread phenomenon?
Action. For example, like just don't buy. That is an action. Whereas if we say icebergs are melting, people don't understand icebergs are melting, then what do I do? So you have to say, what do you do rather than moralize it, Go do these 10 things. That's the kind of things we need,
So I'd like to open up this question to the panel. What are the sort of effective strategies we can deploy to get stronger messaging about personal consumption? Because otherwise, if you don't deploy messaging of any sort, then it is going to become this little action that we don't want. We need to scale it up. If anyone wants to come in on that.
Go back with your family not to buy anything. 1 year.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to mention about the importance of telling the real stories of impact on the ground. I think there's a lot of information around what's happening in terms of the climate crisis, in terms of the challenges, which is really important. We all have all this information about the impacts of the crisis. But there's a story that we often forget to tell, including a story that affects the people that are the most affected by the climate crisis. And I'll give you an example. Right now, most of the information that we see around about Africa, it's mostly around the challenges that people possibly either think are affecting Africa or challenges that have been there before, and the same stories keep being told every other time. Which is true, of course. There's a lot of challenges right now in terms of the climate crisis where people have to deal with the worst impacts, including food insecurity. Just recently, we had so many instances of people who've lost their lives and livelihoods to extreme weather conditions like the coast, like landslides, mudslides, floodings, and all of that. And yes, those are really important messages to send out there, although they are not really sent out to the world with a huge prioritization like we see in countries in the West. Normally, when it's in countries in the global South, it's never as much reported, I would say. And even what is reported, it's not the real stories of impact. It's not the stories of resilience of what these communities are doing to really help themselves out of these challenges. I'll give a good example of a project you've probably or not heard about, like the Great Green Wall, where African communities have come together to stop a desert. But you will not hear most of these stories a lot because the world has not yet accepted to see Africa as a solution that it is in terms of this crisis. Africa right now, for example, has got the most and the highest capability and the highest potential of renewable energy, for example. And also at the same time, Africa has got the most intact resources right now. But they are the resources as well that are the most affected by challenges like foreign direct investments. Everybody wants to come now and really destroy the very beautiful resources that still remain in Africa for development and for all those things that are happening right now. So I think what is really important to communicate right now is the real stories of impact of what is happening at the grassroots levels. Because most of these people, they're not only the most affected by climate change, but they are also the people that are doing the real work on the ground that we are saying that we need this and this to be done. They are already doing it, but they don't get people to support their projects. They don't get people to scale them up. They don't get people to also bring them on the table to share what is it that they're facing and how we can scale them up. We see it at the COP as well. We go to the COP to talk about challenges of people who are not even in the room. So I think that's where the whole problem begins. We need to bring everybody at the table. We cannot discuss about solutions of people who we have not included in the room. We talk about the challenges of indigenous people, for example. Are they in the room? Are they in every room at when making processes? We need everybody at the table and then tell the real stories of challenges and stories of resilience as well of what these people are doing to overcome some of these challenges.
Yeah. And I suppose that sort of brings up the question of how are we going to unite people and unite young people in particular to sort of realize these challenges, realize the ways that we need to approach them that are going to be effective, that's not going to be sort of repeating the same failed experiment over and over again. So I was wondering if anyone wants to come in on that, SM, for example.
I think that it's a combination of what all the panel just said. I totally agree with Jack that it needs to start with actions and actions that have an impact immediately, because we need to stop this. I think yes, to say I never thought about it, but I think yes, that the Black Friday and Monday Cyber and all of this, you found yourself just recently, I think in the last few years, I succeed to have, the ability and the strength not to buy anything, and to check that it's the same price actually, and I don't need that, and I don't need that, and etc. So, and also all these gifts that we get for Christmas that I don't need it, and actually when I need something, sometimes now, my wife say, what do you need for the birthday? I say, I have everything, and I all the time say to friends and my lectures, if I tell you just one thing that you got from your parents when you're a kid, no one ever on earth will describe a material thing. All of us will be describing a hug, a moment, a trip to the beach or something like this. This is what lasts. Or when you found, your notebook, or your diary when you were a child or something. These what really worth to you, not all these gadgets and etc. So really actions is important, as Jack said, and I think it could be a movement, and it really can change things. And we saw this when the COVID started and there was less flights and etc. There was less pollution. But on the other hand, I agree with the rest of the panel that we need to do more things, like more actions that for long term. And I think the focus should be in the young generation. It's really hard because even for me, when someone come to me, I used to be a surgeon before a child psychiatrist. it's beautiful to be a surgeon because you fix it and you see the result immediately. And even if the patients die after 2-3 days, no, it doesn't matter because actually you already got your positive reward. You get out from the operation room, everyone thought that you are God, they kiss your hands, and you thought that you did it. Even though he died after 3 days, you already get the positive reward. As a child psychiatrist, I'm fucked up, sorry, because whatever I do, they tell me, if you didn't take this medication, what will happen? I say, I don't know. Like, let's meet in 20 years or something like this. So it's hard when you don't see the results immediately. That's why I think first we need to understand this and to work on programs that directed to children and to satisfy ourselves because we need it. We shouldn't lie to ourselves. We need these immediate actions, as Jack said, that can see, okay, we're doing something. Let's have a campaign, no Christmas gifts or no things like this. So I will share, like, for Christmas tree, we did something also with my girl. I want to buy like a plastic tree. I never did it. I'm not religious, but I'm Christian Palestinian. So, but they say, we have a kid now, we have to have a Christmas tree. But then I say, you know what? Let's have a tradition called Alma Christmas tree. We bought a real tree, and we decorated. And after Christmas finished, we planted the tree outside. And we said, okay, this is how Alma will have a tree every year in different place. First, we help nature. Second, we save money and less plastics and all of this. So these actions really change. Like, just imagine, like, everyone will be buying a tree during Christmas, not cutting a tree, not plastic tree. And when after Christmas, they will be planted the tree somewhere out. It's huge. Like, it's right, it's a single, but it's a movement in somehow. On the other hand, we need to educate these children why these things are important.
Thanks. Claire, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thank you. I think one thing that really strikes me that summarizes everything that we've said in response to your question is the importance of communication. And I think that's really the key. I don't think the real answer to your question is like, oh, the most impactful thing you can do is, take the bus, take the train. But in thinking and reflecting on my own development as an activist, when I started out just not buying fast fashion and not buying new clothes, it's not really the one item of clothing that I didn't buy that makes an impact, but it's me sharing what I'm doing with my friends, with my family, with the people in my university that really makes a difference. And it makes people think about what really is our collective impact. So I think that's the key thing. And then bringing that broader to the grander scheme of things, back to what Elizabeth was saying about communicating stories of impact and communicating what already is happening and making sure that people know that we're not doomed and there are things that we can do in our personal life, in our professional life, and also taking advantage, back to the technology thing, of how small the world is now and how we can, with one click, me and Smriti can send a message to each other, and how we can share stories and communicate in that sense as well. So I think communication is the one action that is key to what we can do.
Great. We're quite short on time, but I'd like to ask what I think would be quite an interesting question. Should young people be optimistic about the future? I'd go briefly around the panel. Jack, I wonder what your perspective is.
I'm so old, I'm 64. I probably will not die of climate change. The future belongs to my children and the young people. And if they don't solve it, it is actually their problem. What I felt is that if we were to keep on moralizing and showing iceberg melting and glacier disappearing, nobody will understand it. You have to say it in a very simple way where they can actually take action. And if you can, I will be very curious. I hope to contact ASAM, about teaching 4-year-old, 5-year-old how to be climate friendly, how to stop discrimination and all these things, because once you build them at that time, they are indestructible. But if you go and tell the teenager, it's too late. You tell the teenager about climate change, he will tell you all the moral thing and he will not do it. He just do something else. So we have to start very, very young, and then they will be so strong that nobody can change their mind later on. By the time they are teenager, they're like, oh, is my skin very good? Oh, I have to look nice. Oh, they just saw me with this dress last week. I cannot wear this dress anymore. And then I see, Smithry with black t-shirt every day. I think that is the right way to go. And so we have to redefine success to say a billionaire is one that improve a life of 1 billion people, or plant 1 billion tree, or do some billion impact, and then all our vanity will be channeled towards doing good things. Right now, our vanity is channeled towards doing bad things.
Okay.
Our vanity will never go away.
Yeah. So we're running out of time here. So real quick answers now. Should young people be optimistic, Smriti?
So I would like to say that I think that we have to think logically, as Jack said, like be critical, not emotional. That's very important. But also be optimistic and hopeful, because if you're not hopeful, we'll definitely not put in any efforts towards it. So I think it's extremely important. So
Yeah.
I think there has to be a balance between things at this point, and we have to put efforts in every direction, not just can't depend on someone else to do it for us.
Well, I think we've just about run out of time. So sorry, Elizabeth, you jump in real quickly.
Sure. I just wanted to say, I think what we need to do is to turn our reactions into actions and be more proactive, because we do not have time to dwell so much on why we cannot win this fight against the climate crisis. So we need to focus on why we can, and we must win, because this exactly is what keeps most young people optimistic, and they're organizing, coming up together to make sure that really we will not definitely give up without a fight. So I think for me, that's what keeps me optimistic, that I am not alone in this fight. So many other young people are fighting every day to make sure that we really secure this kind of planet that we want to have. And there are so many things that are there that, would want us to give up on this fight. But really what keeps me optimistic is knowing that we are in this fight with so many other young people and so many other people who want to leave this planet habitable, and we must keep fighting, because if we all lose hope, then I don't think we are going to be doing anything at the end of the day.
Thanks. Essam?
Yeah, definitely. I think, if you lose your optimism and your hope, there is nothing really worth to do for, living for. So yeah, they have to be optimistic, and they have to believe in themselves. And I think they are really, the future are in their hand. And, I'm not 64, but I think it's something that everyone should join forces, and to really, as Jack said, we need to work with children so we can design this in a way that they can accept each other when they grow up, because empathy and sympathy and love and compassion and all of this is something that you received and you taught as a baby. It starts from day zero. It's a worst case when you go to a prison and work with a criminal or something. You can't change it anymore sometimes.
Thanks. Jessian?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say that you have to be optimistic, but you have to be realistic, and the reality is that there is a point to doing some things. So, pessimism to the point of giving up on the world is I don't think is very realistic. That's what I would say.
Claire?
Literally exactly what Jessian just said. Yes, but realistic, stay hopeful.
Fantastic. I think that's a really good note to finish it on. So thank you all, and Elizabeth, for joining us. It's been a really interesting discussion, real interesting points around individual consumption, activism, and I hope people watching, there are some points that resonate with you. So once again, thanks to everyone who joined. Thanks to everyone at World Citizen Artists who organised it and made it possible. In particular, our director Valerie, who's done a lot of work behind the scenes that I don't think should go unnoticed. So yes, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ancient rock, red sand, written stories from wise hands. Underneath there is a knowing that connects me to the land. River wash away the pain, fire blowing through my veins. Let us find the answer. Let us walk together to the land, to the world of dreams. Let me share all the love we're needing. Take me there, to the world of dreaming, to be born again on naturaleza. Pintaron estrellas con su misma huella, y entre andando y canto amaron su greda. Seguiré el ejemplo, su lección eterna, pues somos los hijos